when the HOA slammed a local farmer with a $450,000 fine for violating aesthetics, they didn't expect a war. What they overlooked, he held a city contract feeding thousands. As fake complaints turned criminal, the quiet man with dirt under his nails became their worst nightmare.
I used to think the hardest part of farming was waking up before the sun and convincing stubborn soil to cooperate. Turns out, the real challenge was people with clipboards and opinions. My name is Ray Taylor, and my farm sits on 7 quiet acres at the edge of a place called Silver Creek Ridge, a neighborhood so polished it looks like it was waxed every morning by guilt and disposable income. My land was here long before their matching mailboxes and inspirational lawn signs. I never joined their homeowners association, never wanted to, never needed to. I had chickens, goats, rows of vegetables, and a signed municipal lease with the city that made my farm part of the local food supply chain. Schools, shelters, food banks, real places, real people, real hunger. Most mornings started the same way. I fed the animals, checked irrigation, loaded crates for delivery, and tried to ignore the distant hum of luxury SUVs rolling past my fence like judgment on wheels. Some of the neighbors waved. Some stared. A few took photos, like my tomatoes might attack if left undocumented. I didn't mind. I'd left engineering for this life on purpose. Dirt was honest. Contracts were honest. People, less so. The trouble began quietly, which in hindsight should have worried me more. The first letter arrived in a thick envelope with an embossed logo and the kind of paper that smells expensive. Silver Creek Ridge Homeowners Association. I almost laughed when I opened it. It listed violations I had allegedly committed: unapproved agricultural activity, visual pollution, excessive noise during early morning hours, improper fencing, and my personal favorite, unsanctioned accumulation of livestock. It concluded with a demand for immediate compliance and a fine totaling $450,000, spelled out in bold like a threat carved into stone. I read it twice, then a third time, standing in my kitchen with muddy boots still on. They were fining me for existing, for feeding people, for not matching their beige fantasy. I called the number listed and got a voicemail that sounded like it had been trained in passive aggression. I left a message explaining, calmly, that my property was not under their jurisdiction and that I had a city contract. I even used the word municipal, thinking it might impress someone. 2 days later, the inspection started. Not city inspectors, private ones, men and women with branded vests, tablets, and expressions that suggested they already knew the answers they wanted. One measured the distance between my chicken coop and the fence, as if inches could be moral failings. Another sniffed the air dramatically and wrote something down when a goat bleated. I asked who sent them. One smiled and said, "Concerned residents." By the end of the week, the city called. Not to apologize. To inform me that deliveries were being temporarily suspended pending clarification of reported health and safety issues. Temporarily is a dangerous word when food is involved. Temporarily means kids eat something else. Temporarily means contracts wobble. Temporarily means someone, somewhere, is smiling because pressure is working. That same evening, my neighbor Tom Brenner came by. Tom lived just outside the ridge, close enough to hear my tractor, close enough to borrow tools. We'd shared beers, complaints about weather, and once, a near disaster involving an electric fence and a raccoon. He shook his head when I told him about the fines, said it was insane, said those people were out of control. He told me to hang in there, that truth would win. I believed him. I wanted to. The next letter arrived with less ceremony and more teeth. It referenced expert findings, repeated the fine, and warned of further legal action if operations continued. I stood at the edge of my field, letter in hand, watching crates of produce sit unsent, and felt something shift. This wasn't annoyance anymore. This was a push. I drove to the edge of Silver Creek Ridge that night and looked at the glowing windows, the uniform lawns, the carefully curated peace. Somewhere in there was Wesley Green, the association president. Former lawyer. Current problem. I didn't know his face yet, but I knew his handwriting now. Sharp. Confident. Certain that pressure, applied long enough, would make land fold. I went back home and locked the barn, not because I was afraid someone would steal something, but because I had a feeling this was only the opening move. And I was standing in the middle of the board. I wasn't sleeping much after the shutdown. I'd wake up before dawn out of habit, muscles ready to work, brain already counting crates that wouldn't be delivered. Instead of heading straight to the fields, I'd end up pacing the kitchen, coffee in one hand, a stack of useless invoices in the other. The animals didn't care about city contracts or legal limbo. They needed food, water, attention. I gave them all that, but everything felt slower, heavier, like I was moving through syrup. Tara Singh, my attorney, was the first gust of fresh air in a room that had been sealed too long. She'd once worked in the county prosecutor's office and had a radar for fraud. After a brief tour of my property and a look at the complaint letters, she said, flat out, "These aren't just exaggerated. They're engineered." She started making calls, filing records requests, pulling property maps, background checks, even LinkedIn profiles. She didn't talk much, but her silences felt sharp, purposeful, like she was hunting. That same week, something strange happened. A man in a crisp gray suit showed up at the gate. Clean-shaven, white teeth, too confident. Said his name was Mark Redfield, claimed to be from Riverstone Development. Never heard of them. He said his company was working on a luxury expansion initiative, and that my property had caught their attention. He admired the pastoral charm and untapped potential. He smiled like I'd already agreed. Then came the pitch. He said they were prepared to make a generous offer, $900,000 for a quick, quiet purchase. Cash deal. No contingencies, no inspections. I asked him straight up, "Why now?" He gave a practiced chuckle and said, "Well, to be honest, your current situation makes this a unique window. Sounds like the neighbors aren't thrilled with your operation, and the city seems hesitant. This might be your best chance to cash out and avoid further headaches." He looked me in the eye as he said it. Calm. Like he wasn't threatening me, just explaining the weather. I didn't say a word. I went inside, grabbed my phone, hit record, walked back out, and asked him to repeat his offer. He obliged, with a touch more polish the second time. When he finished, I asked if Riverstone had any connection to Silver Creek Ridge. He smiled, a little tighter now. "We do work with neighborhood associations, yes. It's a community-first approach." I thanked him, told him I'd think about it, and watched him drive away in a black Audi that didn't have plates. Just a dealer tag. Tara nearly choked on her coffee when I played her the recording. A few hours later, she called me back with fire in her voice. "Ray," she said, "Riverstone is a shell. Registered to a P.O. box in Nevada. The listed owner, Wesley Green's uncle." Wesley Green, the HOA president, now the shadow buyer of my land. It wasn't just pressure, it was a setup. They weren't trying to fix a problem. They were trying to make my farm a problem, then solve it by erasing me from the map. We documented everything. Filed the recording under potential evidence. Tara sent a cease and desist to Riverstone, addressed directly to Mark Redfield. The address bounced. Classic. That same night, I caught Tom, my neighbor and supposed friend, standing too close to my barn. Phone out. I called his name. He flinched, smiled too quickly, and said he'd been admiring the structure. Said it looked different. I didn't say what I was thinking, just nodded and told him it hadn't changed in years. When he left, I walked around the barn and found fresh boot prints in the mud near my tool shed. Same print pattern I'd seen earlier near the chicken run. Subtle. Quiet. But different enough from mine to stand out. By the end of the week, new complaint letters surfaced, almost word for word identical to the last batch. The same expert names, the same bullet points. Only this time, some of the photos attached showed things that could have only been taken from inside the property. At night. I didn't say anything to Tom. Not yet. I had a feeling the show was still warming up. The thing about betrayal is it doesn't hit you all at once. It seeps in, like water through a crack in the foundation, silent, persistent, and invisible until the floor caves in. I wanted to believe Tom had just wandered too close that night. Maybe curiosity, maybe concern. We'd shared beers, swapped stories, fixed each other's fences. Hell, I helped him bury his old dog 2 summers back. But ever since Riverstone's mystery man showed up, my eyes saw differently. And what they were starting to see wasn't good. Tara wasn't the type to speculate out loud unless she had reason. But even she raised an eyebrow when I mentioned how the latest complaint letter included a photo of my southern fence line, taken at an angle that could only come from inside the property. The timestamp said 2 a.m. I sure as hell wasn't out there at that hour, and neither were my animals. I checked the camera logs. One of them had been tampered with, feed offline for 40 minutes that same night. No signs of a break-in, which meant someone had the code, or was let in. We decided to test a theory. Tara crafted a fake document. Well, a real-looking fake one. An internal memo, supposedly from the city health department, stating that the farm had passed all inspections and would be reinstated within 72 hours. We didn't send it to anyone official, just printed it and accidentally left a copy on the table during one of Tom's casual drop-ins. I made a show of rushing to cover it, muttering something vague and upbeat, like things were finally turning around. Tom smiled. Too wide. 3 days later, Wesley Green gave a statement to a local blog claiming that the farm was dangerously close to regaining operation, despite what he called a mountain of unresolved violations. He quoted exact language from Tara's planted memo, phrases we'd invented, unique terminology designed to be traceable. That was it. Smoking gun. Tara's reaction was cold and precise. She filed a motion to subpoena communication records from the HOA, including emails, texts, and internal memos. We were preparing for a legal blitz, but now we had grounds to allege coordination, not just nuisance. I confronted Tom that night. He came by with a 6-pack like nothing had changed. He started talking about the weather, about his gutters, about some local festival. I let him talk. Then I told him what we knew. The camera footage, the memo, the quote, and I watched his face collapse in real time. He didn't deny it. Not really. He said Wesley had approached him months ago asking for a bit of intel to help navigate the growing concern about the farm. At first, it was small things, noise complaints, photos of problem areas. Then it escalated. He was offered compensation, but only in the form of HOA credits, whatever the hell that means. Free dues, maybe. He claimed he never meant to hurt me, just thought it'd all fizzle out. Then the fines came. Then the city stepped in. And by then, he said, it felt too late to back out. I told him it wasn't too late to testify. He didn't answer right away. just looked at the dirt under his boots and mumbled something about losing the respect of the neighborhood. I didn't have the heart to tell him that ship had sailed the second he sold me out. When he left, I didn't watch him go. I was already on the phone with Tara, giving her the green light to add his name to the list. Not as a target, but as a witness. A tainted one, sure, but one with value. Meanwhile, the complaints didn't stop. If anything, they escalated. Someone left a dead chicken in my mailbox. No note, just feathers and silence. One morning I found a fresh spray of weed killer along the edge of my lettuce row. Not enough to wipe out the crop, but enough to send a message. I bought more locks, reinforced the gate, installed new cameras, and ran a separate offline backup system. I wasn't just fighting a legal battle anymore. I was holding the line. Literally. But then, something happened that cracked the silence. A group of kids from the local high school showed up one Saturday morning. Not with torches and pitchforks, but with cameras and notebooks. They said they were part of a media class filming a project about food justice and local farming. One of them, a lanky kid named Ethan, asked if they could interview me. I hesitated, then said yes. Maybe it was naive. Maybe it was a risk. But part of me was tired of letting Wesley define the narrative. If they wanted to know what was really happening out here, I was damn well ready to talk. I didn't expect a bunch of high school kids with a camera and a public school budget to make a dent in a war waged with lawsuits and real estate muscle. But maybe that's what made it work. They weren't part of the machine. They didn't need permission. They just showed up with tripods, mics held together with duct tape, and wide eyes. And somehow, it felt like they were the only ones asking the right questions. Ethan, the lanky one, led the crew. Polite, but direct. Asked if I'd be willing to give a tour. Walk them through what happened, what the farm meant to the community. I told him he could film whatever he wanted, as long as he didn't step in the goat pen without boots. Half an hour later, he was interviewing me under the shade of the pecan tree, camera trained on my sunburned face, while chickens strutted behind me like backup dancers. He asked me about the contract with the city, about the school programs, about the sudden storm of violations. I answered simply, no embellishments, just the truth. When he asked what I thought the real reason was behind the shutdown, I looked straight at the lens and said, they don't want food, they want my dirt. By the time they wrapped filming, I was sure it'd all disappear into some school project Dropbox and be forgotten after the semester. I didn't know they were entering it into a statewide documentary competition. I didn't know their teacher had contacts at the local news station. I didn't know someone would upload a clip to TikTok with the caption, "Local HOA tries to destroy farm feeding more than 800 kids a week." The video exploded. Within days, my phone was vibrating non-stop. First local press, then national food bloggers. A state senator's office called asking for a copy of the lease agreement. City Hall sent a letter of concern, followed by another from the Department of Agriculture requesting a meeting. Tara was already ahead of it all. She'd been working quietly but relentlessly. While Wesley was busy planting fake reports and whispering into neighborhood ears, she'd been collecting receipts. The recording of the shady Riverstone buyout offer, the memo trap that exposed Tom, screenshots of Wesley's private HOA group where they referred to my farm as a strategic liability and joked about how much the land could fetch once the pig guy's gone. That last one pissed her off. She printed it out and handed it to me wordlessly. I read it 3 times before setting it down. Then I went outside and spent an hour fixing the bent hinge on the north greenhouse, not because it needed fixing, but because I needed something to fix. The trigger came not from me or Tara, but from someone I'd never even met. A parent of one of the kids in the documentary sent an open letter to the mayor's office. In it, she wrote about how her son depended on free school lunches and how those lunches had included fresh produce from my farm, carrots that still had dirt on them, apples that weren't polished but tasted like sunlight. She said her son had started asking where food came from, and she'd told him about the farm down the road. Now he wanted to grow things too. She ended the letter with a line I won't forget. "If you let this place die, so a few rich men can sell matching rooftops, then maybe you're the one who needs inspection." The letter went viral. Tara filed our civil suit 2 days later. $2 million in damages, defamation, interference with contract, attempted fraudulent acquisition of private property, and negligent infliction of economic harm. That last one was her favorite. She said it always made the defense squirm. The suit wasn't just against Wesley or the HOA. It named Riverstone, the HOA board members who signed off on the inspection contracts, and even the private investigators hired to document my violations. She included time-stamped photos, maps, credit card records. One of the so-called experts turned out to be Wesley's cousin, listed as a certified environmental consultant, even though his LinkedIn said he worked in pest control 6 months ago. Wesley tried to go on the offensive, held a press conference in front of the HOA clubhouse, claimed I was a bitter landowner using media manipulation to evade responsibility, called the documentary child propaganda, and insisted he had ample evidence of health violations. 2 hours later, one of the student filmmakers posted the full, unedited interview with me. The video racked up over 500,000 views in 24 hours. Comments poured in from every state. Farmers, teachers, parents, even a few chefs, all calling for the HOA to back off, all calling for accountability. The HOA started to crack. A few board members publicly resigned. One of them, a retired librarian named Gloria, gave an interview saying she'd been pressured into signing letters she didn't understand, that she'd never even met the experts, that Wesley kept most decisions behind closed doors and passed them off as community consensus. Tara filed for injunctive relief, demanding that the city immediately reinstate my supply contract pending resolution of the legal dispute. With the political heat rising and public opinion flaring, the city folded. They issued a statement calling my farm a vital component of our municipal food infrastructure and announced the resumption of deliveries effective immediately. When the city truck rolled into the farm that Monday morning, I swear the chickens started clucking louder. Maybe it was the energy. Maybe it was just feed time. But I stood at the gate and watched crates loaded with tomatoes, beans, lettuce, and a few dozen eggs head out into the world again. I didn't celebrate. Not yet. This was just breathing room. Wesley hadn't gone anywhere. And something told me he didn't like losing. There's something satisfying about watching a machine seize up. One day it's humming smoothly, chewing through problems and people like clockwork. Then a bolt comes loose, maybe a documentary, maybe a lawsuit, and suddenly the gears grind. Sparks fly. Everyone's pretending it's fine until it isn't. Silver Creek Ridge was seizing up. It started with whispers. HOA board members began to miss meetings. The usually smug email updates from Wesley turned clipped, cautious. One of the residents posted anonymously on the community forum, "If this is what our dues are funding, maybe we need new leadership." Within 2 days, it had 100 likes and turned into a petition. By the end of the week, someone stuck a flyer to the clubhouse door. Emergency HOA Assembly, Saturday, 3 p.m., residents only, no executives. The word residents was underlined. twice. That flyer spread like fire in dry brush. I got an invitation, hand-delivered by Gloria, the former board member who'd resigned. She didn't say much, just looked me in the eye and said, "You deserve a voice in this." I nodded. I wasn't interested in revenge, but I was damn interested in truth. Saturday came hot and dry, the kind of weather that makes you sweat before you move. I parked just outside the gates and walked the long manicured path past rose bushes and spotless white fences. At the entrance to the clubhouse, a small crowd had already gathered. Parents, retirees, a couple of teens holding cameras. Not mine, new ones. The story had spread. Wesley wasn't there. People murmured as I entered. Some nodded. A few looked ashamed. One guy, holding a lemonade, muttered, "I didn't know, man," without meeting my eyes. I didn't answer. I wasn't there for apologies. They gave me the floor. Just like that. No timer, no interruptions. I didn't prepare a speech. I told them about the contract with the city, about the kids eating food their parents couldn't afford, about the knockoff consultants and the phony complaints. I mentioned the buyout offer and the cameras that stopped working right before violations showed up. I told them the truth. I wasn't against the neighborhood. I wasn't even against HOA rules. I was against lies. The room was quiet. You could have heard a tomato drop. Then someone stood up. A man in a golf shirt who introduced himself as Daniel Hart. Said he'd supported the HOA for years. Paid every fee. Followed every aesthetic regulation. But now? He looked around. I didn't sign up for this kind of leadership. This wasn't about keeping lawns neat. This was about greed. A few people clapped, then more. Then, to everyone's surprise, Tom stood up. He looked awful, sweaty, pale, voice shaking. But he walked up to the front, like a man walking into a firing squad, and said, "Ray's telling the truth. I helped them. I shared photos. I passed along information. I thought it was harmless. I thought they just wanted to smooth things over. But it wasn't harmless. It was planned." You could feel the collective breath catch. Then the murmurs started again. Tom didn't flinch. He kept going. He admitted Wesley paid him, cash, not credits, slid envelopes through his mailbox, promised community upgrades and preferential treatment when the new development broke ground. He paused, then looked at me. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm not asking you to forgive me, but I'll testify. I'll help undo what I helped break." I nodded once. That was all I could offer. The rest of the meeting was chaos. People shouted. Some defended Wesley. Barely. Most didn't. By the end of it, they'd voted to hold a full board re-election. Emergency provisions in the bylaws allowed it if quorum was met. It was met, and then some. Wesley was suspended from all duties pending the outcome of our civil suit and a potential criminal investigation, because, by now, the DA's office had taken an interest. That evening, I got an email from the city confirming that my contract was active, reinstated in full, and that I was being considered for expansion into a new public health program supplying food to senior centers. That same day, a reporter from Channel 12 asked if I'd be willing to give a follow-up interview. I agreed, on one condition. They had to let the student filmmakers ask the first question. Ethan showed up with a grin and a notepad. First question? What kept you going? I looked into the lens and said, "Spite and spinach." He laughed. I didn't. There was still a trial ahead. Still fences to fix, trust to rebuild, money to recover. But for the first time in months, I could see the dirt again. Not as a battlefield, but as something I could grow from. Courtrooms smell like anxiety and antiseptic. Cold wood, colder stairs, and that buzzing silence that always seems just a second away from snapping. I'd never been in one for anything more serious than a traffic ticket. But walking into that courtroom on the first day of our civil trial, flanked by Tara on one side and a manila folder stuffed with every dirty trick the HOA had played on the other, I felt like I was walking into the ring. Wesley showed up in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my entire greenhouse setup. No smirk this time, no press conference, just a tight jaw and a team of lawyers with identical haircuts and expressions like they'd rather be anywhere else. Tara leaned toward me and whispered, "Dead eyes. That's how you know they bill by the hour." The trial opened with a bang. Tara laid out the timeline in her opening argument. A legitimate farm, a municipal contract, a sudden and coordinated campaign of false complaints, phony inspections, coercion, sabotage, bribery, defamation, and an attempted land grab through a shell company. She didn't embellish. She didn't need to. The facts were sharp enough to cut through any pretense. Wesley's lawyers tried to spin it, claimed the HOA was merely responding to growing community concerns, that the fines were within administrative rights, that the development interest was coincidental and entirely independent. Then came the evidence. Tara called Mark Redfield, Wesley's buyer, to the stand. Redfield looked like he'd aged 10 years in 2 weeks. Probably hadn't expected his side hustle to go federal. Under oath, and with the audio recording played aloud, he folded like wet cardboard. Confirmed that he'd been acting on behalf of Riverstone Development. Confirmed the connection to Wesley's uncle. Confirmed the timing of the offer, right after my contract was suspended. The jury didn't blink. They didn't have to. Next came Tom. He took the stand with hands trembling and voice tight. Admitted everything. The photos, the leaks, the cash payments. Tara handled him gently. She didn't need to break him. He'd broken himself already. The other side tried to paint him as an unreliable witness. Tara calmly pointed out that if he were so unreliable, maybe their client shouldn't have trusted him with orchestrating a harassment campaign. Then she brought out the pièce de résistance, the internal HOA emails. Obtained through subpoena and authenticated, the messages left little room for doubt. Wesley referring to me as that damn dirt vendor, urging board members to find violations, instructing them to bleed him dry until he's forced to sell. One email even included a spreadsheet calculating how much my property would increase nearby home values once sanitized. That word stuck with the jury. Sanitized. Like I was some kind of contagion. The defense tried a new tactic. Blame dispersal. Claimed the HOA board had acted collectively, that Wesley didn't have unilateral control. That backfired. Gloria, the former board member, testified next. Calm, clear, detailed. Said Wesley ran everything like a one-man show, pushed votes through, ignored dissent, and controlled the HOA email server himself. Tara closed strong. She didn't make it about me. She made it about every person in that jury box. This isn't just about farmland, she said. This is about what happens when power goes unchecked, when someone decides they're above the rules and then writes their own. The jury didn't need long. Verdict, in my favor. Compensatory damages, $600,000. Punitive damages, $250,000. Court fees and attorney costs, covered. Total, $850,000. I didn't smile when the verdict was read. I just exhaled, like I'd been holding my breath for months and finally remembered how lungs worked. But the civil suit wasn't the only fire under Wesley's feet. The district attorney's office, now swimming in evidence thanks to our filings, opened a formal criminal investigation into fraud, bribery, and abuse of authority in a registered community organization. Within a month, Wesley accepted a plea deal. He admitted guilt to felony interference with a public contract and misdemeanor falsification of records. He lost his law license, resigned from all HOA-related positions, and got slapped with a 2-year suspended sentence plus a hefty fine. He disappeared after that, sold his house, moved maybe. No one cared enough to track where. The HOA didn't escape clean either. Their insurance dropped them. The board was restructured from the ground up, and a third-party oversight committee was created to monitor all future actions. They had to rewrite their entire charter, this time with language guaranteeing protections for non-member properties and banning retaliation. Me? I got back to work. The farm was recovering. The new school contract came through, and this time it included 3 more districts. We added 2 more greenhouses, expanded the henhouse, and even brought in a part-time nutritionist to help us create seasonal produce boxes for local shelters. Tara and I stayed in touch. She refused to take the full legal fee. Said the case had been cathartic. I gave her a year's worth of fresh eggs and a permanent discount. She said she preferred wine. At night, the fields were quiet again. No headlights, no prowlers, no tension buzzing in the wind, just the low rustle of leaves, the quiet cluck of content hens, and the creaking satisfaction of a gate that now locked for peace, not protection. 6 months later, I was ankle-deep in mud trying to wrangle a goat that had decided it now lived exclusively on top of my compost bins when I heard the buzz of a drone overhead. I didn't bother looking up. I'd gotten used to them. Not surveillance anymore, thank God, just a couple of overenthusiastic students from the high school's media club. They said they were capturing footage for the documentary sequel. I told them as long as they didn't film me falling into manure, they could roll all the B-roll they wanted. The original video they made, titled Ray's Farm, Justice in the Dirt, hadn't just gone viral. It had exploded. Over 8 million views. On TikTok, 2 national interviews and 1 painfully awkward podcast where I had to explain to some influencer what a root vegetable was. My favorite comment under the video read, "This man feeds children and fights corruption. Let him have his chickens." I had it printed on a mug. The school invited me to their media awards night, where the film took first prize in the Community Impact category. I wasn't planning on speaking, but Ethan called me up to the microphone, and the auditorium wouldn't stop clapping until I said something. So I just told the truth. I didn't fight because I wanted attention. I fought because spinach deserves better than a fine. That one landed better than I expected. With the settlement money, I reinvested in the land. We added solar panels, a small classroom shed for school visits, and a sign at the entrance that said Taylor Farms, rooted in justice, grown with courage. Ethan had designed it. His little sister had painted it. And we brought back the Harvest Fest. It used to be a small affair. Some tables, a few pies, maybe one sad bounce house. This time, it turned into a full-blown event. The city co-sponsored it. Food trucks lined the gravel drive. There was a petting zoo, a produce tasting station, live music from a local band that did surprisingly good Fleetwood Mac covers, and, my favorite, a dunk tank with a scarecrow dressed like Wesley Green. No one said it was him, but the tiny briefcase and HOA badge kind of gave it away. Families wandered between stalls, kids ran wild with face paint and sticky fingers, and I stood under the old pecan tree handing out cherry tomatoes like candy. Gloria stopped by and handed me a small envelope. Inside was a thank you card signed by every remaining HOA member, including 3 new ones I hadn't met. One of them, a retired Marine, had apparently rewritten their entire complaint protocol just in case another Wesley ever rears his head. Tom showed up, too. He didn't stay long, but he came. He helped a kid who dropped their popcorn, waved at me from a distance, and left a bottle of apple cider on the donation table with a Post-it note that just said, "For the soil." Later that night, when the crowd thinned and the moon rose high, I walked out to the fence and looked across the fields. The air was quiet again. No tension, no threat. Just the hum of insects, the occasional owl, and the soft rustling of rows and rows of future meals. I lit a cigarette I probably shouldn't have, leaned on the fence, and let it all settle. Not just the dirt, the justice, the noise, the echoes of a fight that could have swallowed me whole, but didn't. Because I stayed. Because I didn't sell. Because sometimes the ground you stand on really is worth more than everything they're offering to buy it for. And sometimes spinach really does save the day.